Few students, today, as you must be watching here, I am going to take a great writer Jonathan Swift. So just concentrate on this lecture and always remember that to attempt any questions, first we have to understand the novelist, the dramatist or the poet, his life. Though we may understand in brief, but it is very important to know certain traits, certain things about his life, which undoubtedly lays a great impact on his personality and thereby on the novels or the dramas or the poets they are writing. So it is very much more important to have a knowledge about his entirety. Fine. So to start with, students, the personality of Dean Drapier Bickerstaff Gulliver. The personality of Dean Drapier Bickerstaff Gulliver is perhaps well known in the world of letters than that of Jonathan Swift in sober history. Why? Because Jonathan Swift, as a man of letters, is the better half of Swift, the man of the world. The sordid surroundings of his domestic life, its frustrated ambitions, and the perpetual sense of injustice to which he imagined himself a victim, all combined to make his private life unspeakably miserable and, very wretched in fact. But when Swift appears before the reader in one of his disguises as Drapier, Tubman, Isaac Bickerstaff, or Gulliver, Dean Drapier Bickerstaff Gulliver, he becomes very lovable, he becomes very adorable, and not only lovable and adorable, but infinitely interesting. So, the man with this strange, with this multiple personality, with this multifaceted inborn talent, he was born in Dublin in 1667. Fine. And we are also informed and told that his father died before Swift's birth, and that his mother was very poor actually. So what happened that his uncle paid for his education at the Trinity College, Dublin, or the grammar school at Kilkenny, and Swift had a very hard time in Dublin, and the result of it was that he did very poorly in his studies, and in his degree was secured through a special grace mark, which was actually equal to a failure. So you can understand his mental level. Ultimately what happened, he tried to better his prospects by joining the University of Oxford in 1692, where he achieved his MA degree with great credentials, with great credit. And meanwhile, Swift was left without sustenance by the death of his uncle in 1688. And this led him to seek the patronage of Sir William Temple. Sir William Temple. क्योंकि जब उनके अंकल की डेथ हो गई, so there was nothing left, then he had to go for his patronage, Sir William Temple, who had married one of Swift's mother's relations. Now understand, students, that why the nurturing of any author is needed. Some of you students might feel that these initial things should not be taught, but yes, this is of great importance, because if this will not be taught, then in chronological sequence you will not know that how he has nurtured and who was Sir William Temple, and when you will write certain answers you will take those help which I have been teaching you. So he was by no means satisfied by his patronage by Sir William Temple, which did not amount to anything better than you can say a secretaryship, and Swift grew more impatient to his patron's attitude towards him. So what happened, students, that he left, he went to Ireland. कहाँ चला गया वो? He went to Ireland, where he entered the church. जब आयरलैंड गया तो वो चर्च चला गया. He entered the church and received a small living. 2 साल बाद अप्रोक्सीमेटली यहाँ से जाने के बाद जब वो चर्च में गया, 2 years after, however, Sir William Temple, who was his, you can say, patronage, recalled Swift, who returned and stayed in England up to the death of his patron in 1699. तब तक रहा जब तक उसके पेट्रन की डेथ नहीं हो गई. डेथ कब हुई? 1699 में. And it was in this period, ये वो period है. Now you understand that we are coming to the most important aspects. So when he finally died, that is William Temple, so it was in this period that Swift wrote 2 of his great works. And what are those 2 works? This is definitely important, students, for everyone to know, because this you have to write while writing or telling the examiner about the knowledge of Swift which you have attained. So these 2 great works, the title is The Tale of a Tub and Battle of the Books. The Tale of Tub, A is missing. The Tale of a Tub and the Battle of the Books. Yes. So it was at this period of life also that Swift met Esther Johnson. Now see, a very important aspect of his life. It was at this period of life when he was writing, he had completed these 2 important books, he met Esther Johnson, who was destined to exercise a fateful influence over his whole life. Understood? This lady Esther Johnson was destined to exercise a very fruitful influence over his whole life. And it is to this lady that Swift refers to as, Swift इसको refer करता है as Stella. Fine. In his correspondence, जब वो correspondence कोई करता है तो this Esther Johnson is named as Stella. And in his correspondence to her, which reveals the childlike character of Swift, which is directly contrasted with his savage irony and cynicism to the universally associated with his later writings. So आप compare and contrast जब करेंगे, जब लिखेंगे, so you will be having this knowledge in your mind where you can say that this correspondence which you used to do with Esther Johnson in the name of Stella, which can be directly contrasted with his savage irony, for which he has been very popular, for the cynicism for which he has been popular, and so universally associated with his later writings. Fine. Then until students he met Bolingbroke in 1710. until he met Bolingbroke in 1710. Swift's associations had bound him to the Whigs. आपने पढ़ा होगा Whigs and Tories, मैंने भी पढ़ाया होगा. Had bound him to the Whigs, but the anti-clerical attitude of the Whigs, their plan particularly of raising up other Protestant sects into equality with the Anglican communion, was bitterly distasteful to him. For Swift was primarily, as I told you few minutes before, he entered the church. So for Swift was primarily a churchman, and his interest in politics was confined to this outlook. दूसरे शब्दों में अगर हम कहें, in other words, he sacrificed his politics in the interest of his position in the church. And Swift joined the Tories. Swift joined the Tories under Bolingbroke, who recognized his genius, which he employed in the interest of his party. And the last years of the reign of Queen Anne, that is 1710 to 1714, these are the last years of the reign of Queen Anne. So the last 4 years of the reign of Queen Anne saw Jonathan Swift at the zenith of his political powers. He was basically a formidable force in the English political life of the period, although he retained his friendship with Edison and others who belonged to the Whig party. So when Queen Anne died in 1714, the Tory ministry had to break up, and Swift had an experience at this point of his eventful life, which provided, you can say, as an antidote of his vanities. And he had entertained very high hopes of being made at least a bishop in England in return for what he had done, and for what he had done basically for the government. But you know one thing, he was sadly disillusioned when he was offered the deanery of Dublin. So he had, however, nothing to choose, and so he accepted this offer as the deanery of Dublin and lived chiefly in Dublin with the occasional visits to London. And his story in Ireland, which now became his adopted country, was equally eventful, was equally influential. He did for Ireland some things which not even the most loyal of her patriotic sons could ever hope to do. And it was Swift who actually stirred the national consciousness. क्या किया इसने? He stirred the national consciousness of the Irish people, who has, which has in recent years borne for the reaching results. And there has never been a champion of the Irish liberties more vehement, more powerful than Swift. And the grateful people cherish the Dean's, memory with the unabating loyalty. And we can also say here that the last years of Jonathan Swift were darkened by the gloom of insanity and bodily disorders. Right from his boyhood, Swift had contracted a disease which was characterized by deafness, which was characterized by giddiness,